Hello, this is Dr Helen Webberley. Welcome to our GenderGP podcast, where we will be discussing some of the issues affecting the trans and non-binary community in the world today, together with my co-host, Marianne Oakes, a trans woman herself, and our head of therapies.
Reese, really lovely to have you. Thank you for coming and joining us today. I'm with Marianne Oakes and myself and Reese Lyons, who is a poet and a trans woman, and I'm going to let her take on the introduction from there, if you don't mind, Reese.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for having me. Yes, I am a trans woman. I just, as some kind of like background information, I recently wrote and performed a poem at the Roundhouse Poetry Slam final this year, which is something they do every single year. And yeah, I basically wrote a poem about being a trans woman and my trans experience, and then it went viral online. So I think now it just has over, I think it's like some 2 million views, something crazy like that.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, so the reaction has been amazing, which is, I'm very, very lucky.
What prompted you to do the poem, if that's not an obvious question, Reese?
You know, I think there's definitely a lack of representation for, you know, trans people, and especially trans women representing ourselves. You know, I think a lot of stuff is created about trans people, but it's often sensationalism. And I just wanted to create something that was heartfelt, you know, but that came from, you know, the actual person who's experienced it and, you know, my lived experience.
Just talking about that, I mean, I think I have had the privilege of meeting a very great number of transgender people of both genders and all the way in between, and it's been an enormous privilege for me. I know that privilege isn't afforded to other people, and there may be a lot of people listening who have never had that privilege to meet or speak to somebody who really understands what it means to be transgender, whatever that means. Would it be okay if we asked you to just explain what it means to you, and the obvious questions like, how did you know when did you know, how did you know, how did you find out about it, how did you explore it? Do you know what I mean? There's very basic concepts that perhaps other people haven't had the privilege to hear from the horse's mouth, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. How did I know? The age-old question. I don't really know how I knew. I think, you know, for many trans people, just anyone LGBT really, you know, I kind of have this thing where I don't want to have to explain myself or kind of like prove my humanity to people, if that makes sense. Which I'm not saying that question means that, but I just mean that we do live in a society where, you know, cis people especially just want these answers, if that kind of makes sense. And I don't know if I can always give those answers. You know, I don't know if it's nature or nurture. All I know is that I've felt this way ever since I was a child. And I think that's something a lot of trans people would agree on. But, you know, it is very personal for everyone. Some people discover it later in their lives. So, you know, I'm 19, so I don't know if that's late or early or what. I think as time goes on, people are beginning to transition earlier and earlier and earlier. You know, recently I met, I think it was like a 12-year-old trans guy, and it was just amazing just to have like a 5-minute conversation with him. I was just like, wow, you're 12 years old, like that's crazy. That's absolutely insane.
I think what a lot of people have told me is that perhaps when they were younger, they knew something, but they didn't know what. Do you know what I mean? And I think perhaps maybe today's children have access to a lot more information. You know, obviously the internet gives that information. There's all the videos on YouTube, poems such as your inspiring poem, and people willing to share that story. And so children these days have a much clearer idea, don't they, about what that thing is that perhaps people who were born 10, 20 years ago hadn't got a word for it. Do you know what I mean? Does that fit with you, Marianne? Reese? I don't know.
I definitely. I have to say, we forget that before 2010, I think it was, schools weren't allowed to discuss diversity. It was seen as promoting homosexuality. So I think the younger generations, hopefully, are at least having it taught to them in school that diversity is okay, or that there is diversity and the many colours that come with diversity. What I was going to say, Reese, did you recognise, did you get any education in school? I mean, I don't want to say you're only 19, but obviously you've been through the education system in more recent times. Was anything taught to you at school?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and going back to the original question about children, when I was growing up through school, there was definitely this great sense of shame to be transgender or shame to be LGBT, because back when I was at school, we didn't really have the word trans, we kind of just had the word gay, which was something that was, heavily attributed to me. But then, growing up, I kind of learned to separate myself from that identity, and I understood more about gender and sexuality and the difference between those two things. But no, like you say, Marianne, I didn't actually know that before 2010 it wasn't allowed. Is that correct? It wasn't.
Yeah, my understanding is it was I can't think what the law is, so forgive my ignorance on that. But I was told, Reese, because I wasn't aware of it till I went to do a talk in school, and I said, "Oh, isn't it fantastic that we can come and do these talks?" And they said, "Well, actually, before 2010, it wasn't allowed."
That's crazy. That is crazy. So yeah, before 2010, well, I would have been in primary school at that time, and I received absolutely no education about LGBT people, probably up until the age of around 16, which is kind of sad. I was lucky enough to go, so I went to the Brit school for my sixth form or my college. So at that school, they're really great at talking about LGBT topics. They host things like LGBT assemblies, stuff like that. But no, up until that point, I had never really been exposed to anything lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, plus throughout primary school or secondary. It was very much like a hushed topic, I think.
I'll tell you something that this might sound really tiny to you, Reese. I don't know if it does or not. But one of the things I really liked about your poem is you used the word tranny in there. and years ago, I'm obviously a completely different generation to you. So, but years ago we used to use it. It was commonplace, amongst friends. I remember we had some friends who all lived in the same house, different apartments in this house, and they used to call it tranny towers, and it was just commonplace. And then recently, society seems to have ripped it from us, like they own it, and it became a negative word. But I love that and you're telling me you're 19 and you used it in the poem. So were you comfortable using that word?
That makes me smile. I think it's definitely a word of reclamation. It's interesting that you described how it started out as one thing and then society made it another, and then I guess now, we are reclaiming it in a sense, I guess you could say.
If I use it in front of, if I was out socially just with cis people, not within a trans context, and I used it, people would be outraged at me. And I'm thinking, who are you to be outraged at me? But yeah, I do feel it was ripped. I use the word ripped from me, to have people frown at me when I use it. So hearing it in the poem, really, I found it was inspirational, I have to say, and I loved it.
Oh, thank you. I think you're right. And I think it's your word to use, no? Because if people are going to use it against us, then surely we can own it and reclaim it and use it however we want to, because it's our word. Especially when it's used in a context to oppress trans people. I think there's nothing better than trans people reclaiming it. And you said about tranny towers, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I'm with so I have a couple of trans friends, and we just say it casually, we just, it's not really a big deal to me. It doesn't hold that much weight, so, when we're in the car and we're going to the shops, we say tranny trip, stuff like that, which obviously I wouldn't recommend that be language that cis people use. But for me as a trans woman, yes, I do feel like I can use it and joke about it.
That's like you say, reclaim it. It's our word to use, and we should choose when and when not to use it.
I think as a mother teaching my children, as a cis woman trying to teach other non-transgender people, as a doctor trying to teach healthcare professionals, what I find is that people are always very scared of the words. They don't want to offend anybody. And, talking 20 years later for homosexual people, is the word gay allowed now or not? Do you know what I mean? It's have we managed to reclaim that word gay? Is it okay to use that word? And also black. My children struggle. Is it okay to call that person a black man or a black woman? Do you know what I mean? So wording is very, very important. But also, I find, particularly with my work with transgender people, is that people are so scared of causing offence, and they're that scared of causing an offence that they don't say anything at all. And, they won't go off to speak to anybody in the street or ask anybody any questions, or, that conversation is stilted because of this fear of causing offence. And maybe that's because of what we've learnt from our experiences with other minority groups through history. And I don't know about you two, but I encourage anybody just to, say, start it with, I tell me if I'm going to use the wrong words or offend you. I don't mean to do that at all, but can you teach me what it's like to be you, or what this means for you? Because I don't really understand that. I don't know what you think about that, Reese.
I really like that you've touched on that, because it's a topic that I've been thinking about a lot recently, especially when engaging with new people, right? So you mentioned about causing offence. I think that is a sentence that is said to me a lot as a trans woman. Oh, I didn't mean to cause offence, or sorry if I offended you. About half the times I'm not really offended because I often correct people on their language, on anything that I hear them say that isn't really, that doesn't really make sense. So, when people say things like transgendered, and, I have to tell them that trans is an adjective, it's not a verb, and it's often met with, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to cause offense. I'm sorry. But it's not about causing offense. It's just about holding yourself accountable. And I think a lot of cis people don't want to be held accountable for their own ignorance. I'm not offended. I'm not someone that easily gets offended. When I correct someone, it's because I want them to develop and better as a person. So when they have future interactions with trans people, it's not this, minefield of like, what am I allowed to say? What am I not allowed to say? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's about education, isn't it? Whatever you call it, it's about educating people, and people are keen to learn, aren't they? And I guess that's what you've done with your poetry, is in that way, through that medium, using it as a way of telling the story, teaching people, shedding light, enlightening anyone who wants to listen, which I think is amazing. And if we go back to your poem. Again, when I'm talking to transgender patients, and particularly actually parents of children when the future is unknown, and they're often scared about the fact that their children will be different. And if treated right, the only difference may be down below, underneath the underpants. And how is my child going to cope with that? The fact that everything else looks exactly the same as the rest of their peers because they've had the right medical intervention, but downstairs is still going to be different in some way. So, that's obviously something that you've bravely approached and shared with the world. And I'd love you to just explain that here, if you would.
Right, yeah. Well, the first line of the poem is, I'm more than I have a penis. So, yes. I'm very... what's the term? Pull no punches. I'm very blunt in, what I want to say. There's no point me treading around the issue or, walking on eggshells around what I really want to say. That is the reality. And then further into the poem, I kind of explore what that means and how that is basically me saying I'm a trans woman and yada, 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 listing off, I guess, all the things that I've experienced.
I felt, listening to the poem, you encapsulated, I'm not sure how long the poem is, but within a few minutes, you encapsulated what most trans women experience. And you could write a paper on it and it could be 40 pages long. You encapsulated it so brilliantly. Like I say, I was moved purely by the way you approach the whole subjects. And like we were saying earlier, that if you wanted to teach somebody, you could let them listen to that poem and you would tick off a lot of the boxes very quickly. Was that your intention?
Thank you. I think, so the poem was 3 minutes long because it had to be under 3 minutes. I was kind of just channeling all this stuff that was within me. I'm a creative person, I'm an artist, so this stuff just, I notice these things a lot, and the way I kind of express it is through writing and performing and poetry and stuff like that. So it's kind of just everything that I've kind of experienced over this past year coming out of me, and the things that I want to say and the things that I've read in the press, and how I see the microaggressions of how trans women are treated in society, and how basically just my lived experience. And I think, it's a real acknowledgement to have someone say, especially another trans person say, you've encapsulated it correctly, because there are so many portrayals of trans people that are just so linear, or not portrayed in the right way, or not even portrayed by trans people themselves, which kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, I really want trans people to step up and speak for themselves, represent ourselves, because really no one else can do it for us. It's very much for me in the same way that I would look at something like race. Would you get, I don't know, if you take the character of something like Othello, who is a black man, would you get a white man to play Othello? I don't know. You could argue that could be an interpretation, but would they have the lived experience to be able to play that role truthfully, right? So why is it with trans people, things like, I don't know, the Danish Girl, we can just have like a white cis guy come up and play the role, and expect for it to be this amazing thing, when really I'd like to see trans people doing it, representing themselves.
Just to be clear as well, I think you encapsulated it perfectly, not just well. It was brilliant. So,
thank you.
And I do think you're right as well. If I'm hearing you correctly, we always seem to be so on the sidelines of society, waiting to be invited in, if that makes sense. And if I'm understanding you correctly, maybe we're coming to a time where we've got to say, well, we're not going to wait to be invited in. We're going to come in. And we're going to be who we are without apology. Would that be kind of what your poem is saying as well?
Absolutely, and just representation for trans people. We're the people that have the lived experiences, so we can tell the story the best. I don't need a cis person to speak for me. I can speak for myself. And I think pretty much all trans people have been saying that all along. It's just whether society is willing, like you said, to let us in, to listen to us, to put us on the TV, to put us on the stages, to let us write our own books, to, let us do things like this, which is a podcast, to let us speak for ourselves, rather than have someone speaking for us or trying to emulate what essentially is a lived experience.
Yeah. The fear of coming in as the cis person, and I feel a little bit kind of like, oh dear, am I welcome? But I think what we can do and what we should be doing is creating that safe space for you to be able to share your story, make your representations, and again, educate and show. So, I'm a doctor, so in my line, in your GP surgery, we've talked about this before, Marianne, haven't we? Is there something that says this is a safe space for people of whatever issue or minority feature that they may have? Is this a safe space where they can comfortably speak out for themselves and ask what they want? And schools, clothing stores, makeup departments, all things like that, are they safe spaces for trans people to say, hello, I would like assistance, or I would like to buy something, or I would like some help with, or I would like to talk about, me as a trans person. So that safety is really important to create, I feel.
I think there's something about the trans part of the label, I suppose. If we're going to say I'm a trans woman, I think we get pushed into fitting the ideal of a woman. So if I'm going to go into the makeup store, I don't want to shock the assistant. So I try extra hard to remove any questions. But actually, I'd like to think we're moving to part where we can own the trans and be proud of the trans and be equally valued, that the assistant at the makeup counter or the nurse in the doctor's surgery does not, we're not worried about their embarrassment, because I think that's part of what, certainly my motivation is, what's this person, how's it going to make them feel when I walk in and they can see I've got a penis? The nurse, how's she going to respond to that? So we tend to try and soften, sugar the pill would be the description, and actually it's tiring. It's really tiring doing that. And I think, again, I'm going to go back to the poem here, and that's why I was moved by it, because you just cut through all them barriers, loud and proud, if that's a fair statement. But yeah, when I heard that poem, I felt it gave me permission to embrace the trans as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think what you say is really, really true. And it's something I touched on the poem, like you said. I will take up space is one of the lines. I think we live in a society that's so cis-normative. So, like you said, trans women are constantly under this consistent pressure to pass, right? To be essentially cis, to be cis women, to look like cis women, to act like cis women, to embody cis women, which isn't a bad thing, I think, necessarily. Of course we want to pass. Of course we want to be safe, because we don't exist in a society that was built for us. We don't exist in a society that accommodates to trans people, like you were kind of saying, Helen, about, the shop assistant. Is this something that's a safe space? A lot of places aren't safe spaces. So I think it's about striking that balance, for me personally, my transition as well, to the point of being like, well, to a certain extent, how much do I pass? Can I pass as a cis woman? And then if I do pass as a cis woman, how can I still cling to my kind of queer identity and proudness of being trans? Because there's like half of me that wants to pass all of the time 100% as a cis woman, no questions asked, right? So I don't have to suffer the brunt of being a trans woman in this, cis-normative, binary adhering society. But then there's also another part of me that's like, okay, well, I want to be visibly queer. I want to be visibly trans. I want to embrace that identity. I want to not feel ashamed in that identity. I want that identity to be, big and loud and proud and recognized in other people, and so I can see it in them and we can share it in this experience. So I'm still trying to find the balance between that. I don't know about you, Marianne.
Definitely, without question. I think, and I'm learning, I have to say, I don't want to kind of labour the point, but I do come from a different generation. I was born when it was illegal to be gay.
Right.
And how's that impacted on me growing up? How's that impacted on how I might be perceived in the world? And of course, it's affected me in the internalised shame, shall we say, that, trans people were just the butt of the joke, or we were the demonised, villain in the media.
Yeah.
And it's escaping them shackles. And again, I'm going to come back to, seeing young people now flourishing, for you to get 2 million hits on your video. I mean, how phenomenal is that? That just would not have happened a few years ago. So, yeah, freeing ourselves of the shackles of how we've been conditioned. And we're not there yet, actually. And I think, you said 50% of you is still trying to adhere to the cis-normative view of all of this. But there's 50% of you wants to challenge it and be proud of your difference, I suppose.
Yes.
I think, if I might say, I listening to that is really interesting. And what I'm hearing myself, and what I hear from lots of other people, is that some people want to live at what they call stealth. So, so that nobody ever knows that they are transgender and that their gender is different in any way, shape or form to that they were assigned at birth. And some people want to be as proud as punch of it and wear as many colours and as many badges that says, I am trans and I am immensely proud of that. And then, of course, you have all the other people in between. And what I feel is that it should be your choice and how you want to present today, tomorrow, or next week, and whether that's different on those different days. It shouldn't be because you're having to fit in with something that will accept you. And it should be your choice, not what we dictate should happen. And that's what I'm kind of getting from what you were talking about there. Does that make sense? And what I feel that society needs is education on how to allow people to be themselves, so they don't have to pretend to be a cis woman. Maybe they don't want to be a cis woman. And it's about, again, going back to education, isn't it? And how trans people are treated in society, as you said, Reese, earlier.
Yeah, no, exactly. And honestly, it just fills me with sadness that we're even having this conversation, because it's like, we really have to teach the society to respect people. Like, that's absolutely mad. We're teaching people not to discriminate. That is absolutely ludicrous. And I think it just says a lot about the society that is, cis-normative, heteronormative, primarily, whitewashed. Minorities are just suffering so much. And it honestly, it fills me with sadness. It fills me with anger, and I think that's another part of why I wrote the poem. A lot of it is based in anger and in pain and speaking from my experience and wanting things to change and wanting to share it. And then kind of just going back to what you said about being stealth, I think it is really interesting as well when you also, looking at it from a medical perspective, introduce things like hormones, right? Because you have this dysphoria where it's like, okay, well, I want to have access to things like hormones. I may want to have access to things like surgery, facial feminization surgery, breast augmentation, sexual reassignment, whatever it may be, or for trans men, top surgery, phalloplasty, whatever. So if I do gain access to those things, I will then begin to pass. But then what about my internal or social identity that doesn't want to pass? So you kind of come at a crossroads with those values. And I think that's what I was kind of trying to say about how Marianne said about the 50% of me is cis, 50% of me is trans, because as I go on this journey, as my transition progresses, I do begin to pass more, and I do begin to get read as female consistently more, and I do begin to access the privileges, but also, the misogyny that cis women face, right? So, but at the same time, I have this trans identity that's kind of within, that's kind of internal.
What you're saying is the trans part of us never leaves us. We can change the exterior, but we can't change that we are trans, and that stays with us. I agree completely. One of the things when I'm working with clients in therapy, it's getting them to understand that all we're really doing is managing our dysphoria on many levels.
Yeah.
That we find a way to make it go a bit quieter, or to get an angle on it. And, for this week, I've done this and it feels better, but next week it could come back. I'd like to say that we do get control. I think some people do. I think some people never get control of it, and and they can have all the surgeries and all the hormones, and unfortunately, maybe because they've never accepted that they are trans, that they never really get control of the dysphoria.
Yeah, that is really interesting to you say that. Yeah, it's kind of scary because I'm like, I don't know where I fall into that scale.
I think
so, I didn't mean to scare you, I have to say.
I mean, the dysphoria, isn't it? Because people tell me that sometimes some people have dysphoria about their voice. For some people, it will be about their chest, whether it's a male-looking chest or a female-looking chest. For some, it may be down below. For some, it may be hair or skin or emotions. But everybody is so different. And I would just say, if I may ever give advice, it would be about do it because it's what you want, rather than do it because you're trying to fit in with what society expects you to have. And maybe, Marianne, some of those people that you were talking about just now who never quite managed to get that self-acceptance or completion with any of their treatments or path or journey, is it because they're trying to satisfy themselves or the outside world, whatever it might take to satisfy the outside world? Do you know what I mean?
I think I do. There's two. When you were just speaking, then two things came into my mind. How are we making this decision because it's the right decision for me? Are we making this decision because it's the right decision for other people?
Yeah, absolutely.
And, we can make the right decision for the wrong reasons as well. So I hope I'm going to be pro counselling. So hopefully when people come into therapy, that's what we're trying to encourage them to do. Why do you want hormones, or why do you want surgery? Are you doing it because actually it's your choice and you're making it based on it's about me? Or are you making it because you're thinking, actually, when I go down to the swimming pool, if I haven't got a vagina, then I'm going to be shunned. So, and I think that's kind of really what I see in the therapy room. Why are these people making this decision? Again, it comes back to that owning your own transness. Would that be the right word? What do you think, Reese?
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. It does come back to owning your transness. But then also, I just feel like in the society, can you really blame them? Am I really going to blame myself for wanting to do something that perhaps could be interpreted as satisfying other people, because ultimately it could make me safer, right? And I just can't let go of things like the murder rate of trans women of colour in particular, and how high that is. And it makes me think, well, I wouldn't really blame them if they wanted SRS, maybe not because they've desperately wanted a vagina their entire life, but maybe just because it would make them safer.
Yeah.
Interesting, actually, because through all this conversation, we're not even talking about culture, are we? And there are certain sections of society where, their view of being trans is going to be totally different. And, trans women of colour, definitely, what's going to motivate them to stay safe. And obviously, maybe being passable or blending or whatever we want to call it is far more important to them because their culture will actually reject them.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sometimes feels like that, when we talk about big things like the world or that country or that culture, it seems like such a big mountain to climb. And I'm just going to go back to your swimming pool, Marianne. And I think maybe if we were opening up a new leisure centre in town tomorrow, the rules could very easily be that we welcome everybody in this swimming pool and in this changing room, and we welcome you whatever you are. And whether you are a woman of colour who has a penis and is gay, you are completely welcome in this leisure centre. And I think if we start small and then broaden out, then I think the world will look better for trans people in the future. And we have seen acceptance through history of other minority groups. And so I think from that point of view, the future is very rosy. And it helps so much, Reese, for people like you to be so vocal and be proud of the fact that you're trans, proud of the fact that you're a woman, proud of the fact that even though you're a woman, you have a penis, and you can share that with people in such an eloquent way. And small steps like this make massive strides in the future.
What I did want to just moving the conversation along a bit. Are you doing any more poetry, Reese?
So I recently have joined my first collective, which is amazing and exciting. But yes, I am writing. I am performing more. If you follow me on social media, you can find all of my links and things like that to which venues I'm doing. So at the moment, I kind of just work on a freelance basis, writing and performing. So yeah, I am writing.
Do you ever travel up north, Reese?
If you want to book me up north, absolutely. I'll come. I'll go anywhere. Yeah, it just depends.
I was going to say I'll have to speak and see if we can find a venue for you and invite you up. Definitely, we need to spread the word. So let's see if we can spread it up north.
We will definitely be sharing it on our social media channel. We will put all the details in the show notes. So anybody who hasn't had the privilege to read and listen to Reese's poem, we will put that in the show notes for you to do that. And I think you should. It's inspirational, it's educational, and it's the words of a young proud trans woman, which has obviously touched you, Marianne. I can see that, and I loved it. Reese, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. It's great to talk to young people. It's great to talk to your generation, Marianne. It's great to talk to today's youngsters. I think it's really inspirational and exciting for the future. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me as well. Yeah, it's been really great to speak to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Reese. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed our programme. Do go ahead and subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you or anyone else are affected by any of the topics discussed in our podcast and you'd like to contact us, please drop us a line at doctor@gendergp.co.uk. We're very happy to accept ideas for future episodes and guests, or if there's something specific you'd like us to cover. You can also visit our website, www.gendergp.co.uk. You can follow us on social media @GenderGP, and you can sign up to our monthly newsletter. Full details can be found in the show notes on our podcast page. Thanks for listening.